Miriam is a gifted writer, teacher, and a really kind and compassionate person. She founded and directed the creative writing program here at Santa Fe Community College and has taught writing workshops across the United States. She maintains a regular blog that, if you haven't read it, I highly recommend, called Miriam's Well. It has great writing and really interesting pictures and comments on it. At the end of the presentation, we'll be asking for questions. So if you can hold your remarks until then, we would appreciate that. And for those of you who have your mic open, we'll ask you to turn that off right now, just to avoid having any distracting noise while Miriam is reading. So please help me welcome Miriam Sagan. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. My first thanks go to Santa Fe Community College Library. We've had a really fun year working with each other, and I loved librarians before, and I love them even more now. So thank you for all your help. And the person I really have to thank, of course, is my editor, Susan Gardner. And I will talk a little bit as I read about ideas that she had and what it was like to work with her, but the book would not exist without her. And I also have to thank my husband, Rich Feldman, for giving me what I would call a professional yet friendly copy edit. He worked for many years for the State Legislative Council here, and let's just say a book of poetry is not a law or a bill. So I'm grateful he was able to switch genres. Okay, so I'm going to read, talk, and share the book with you. I'm so happy the book is out. It's really exciting for me. About a year into the pandemic, or 9 months into the pandemic, I became just deranged by feeling a lack of stimulation. But I thought, what if I was in a Zen monastery and I decided to do 100 days of Zen practice, and I probably even paid money for that, right? I might be going crazy, but I wouldn't feel like I hadn't chosen it. So I made up a fake monastery. I made up a fake monastery that existed only in my mind, and there were certain things that I could do in the monastery or not. And I did it for 100 days. And I will read some of these poems, the monastery poems that are scattered throughout the book. And you'll see there's some unconventional, non-monastic things in these monasteries too. And this is the title poem of the book. In the monastery of a nice day to start again. As if the sea rose, came up the 2 front steps, covered the mat, foamed at the front door. Sleep deposited its cargoes. Love also ebbed and flowed, set my naked body next to yours as I pillowed your head beneath my chin. I danced watching the mountains to the west, Billy Idol belting. I danced my crippled girl and my other self together. The mountain was not just watching, it was dancing too, only its movements in time imperceptible. Of course, I think about Billy Idol constantly. I don't know why, but every time I'm in a spiritual crisis, it comes on the car radio. Start again is well, something we have an option about, right? We can either do it or we can't. And I'm hoping that we can. And these poems came out of the attempt to, not always successful, but the attempt. I'm very fond of my neighborhood, my funky, funky West Side neighborhood. And this poem, The Star, is about the West Side. West on shabby Agua Fria Street, in the solstice dusk, to the village itself, where strands of blue lights hang in otherwise bare trees, and the occasional solitary star adorns the roof of an old lady whose son-in-law put it up. From this tender portion of what I call my world, we watch Saturn and Jupiter conjunct appear as one, while in reality they are 456 million miles apart, with you driving and me riding shotgun in the passenger seat. This is another poem about relationships. It's about marriage, so it has a little bit of blame in it, a little bit of confusion. It's called Spouses. What's that noise? The wife asks the husband. Even after so many years, Night noises, raccoons, and the federal government are his problem to solve. It's not late before midnight. Firecrackers, he speculates, although it sounds like gunshot, and we're just blocks from the Capitol building, where armed men show the threat of force. But probably the husband is correct. It's Midsummer's Night and America's birthday, a few weeks away. Although frankly, I'm not sure this country of mine deserves much of a party. Much later, towards the witching hour, skunks head home and spray through our bathroom window that opens on the narrow alley that creatures used to cross. The thrashers are sleeping in the blossoming cholla bush. Not once in all these years has the invisible neighbor's orange cat managed to catch a bird in all these cactus needles. I could still see Gail Reiki smiling. We live in a similar neighborhood. If this was in person, I'd be telling you to buy books and I'd be signing them, but I'm telling you to buy books anyway. You can buy these copy of this book from Small Press Distribution. You can get your local bookstore to order it from Small Press Distribution. You can get it on any of the online venues. And Susan Gardner, if you feel like putting in the chat any additional ordering information, that would be great, but it's not hard to find, which is a wonderful thing. I was reminiscing with my friend Judith when she came in that we met in a car a long time ago coming back from the New York Small Press Book Fair. And I was in my mid-20s and I didn't realize when I was in that car that I would never leave the small press scene. I think I would have been happy if I had known that I just fell in love with it when I was in high school. And also in the audience is my first co-editor, my friend Alma Gottlieb. We had a magazine called The Purple Dragon in high school, and we gave the proceeds of it to Biafra relief. So it's been essentially, for me, Start Again is also about continuation, right? We don't know where we're starting exactly. And for me, being a writer has been completely tied up with community, with small press publishing. And I want to thank all of you really for letting me be in your communities and for being in mine. It's been very powerful, particularly in the last 2 years. So the most initiatory experience that this book covers is the rather boring to other people sometimes experience of being a grandmother. And you know how grandmothers pop out their pictures, and show them to you. So when my granddaughter was born 3 years ago, of course I wanted to write about her, but how was I going to write about her in a way that wasn't just about popping out my photos, right? Well, it might be a little bit like that, but I tried to think about that experience of seeing again through the eyes of a child, of being with a child in a very low-key, non-pressured, irresponsible way. Wow, how great is that? Kind of like being a big sister, kind of like being a preschool teacher. You have some responsibility, but not a primal responsibility. And this poem is called The Fool. And afterwards, I'll talk about where its title came from. The Fool. The baby is naked. I'm clothed. She has the hose. And foolishly I shriek, "Don't get me wet," egging her on. Her blonde tousled hair bangs in her eyes. She can say "aunt" and "please," but what is she really thinking? So too, the neighbor's bees cast runes in the book of the day. Purple blossoms I've cultivated for pollinators all. In the ruined city, there is honey beneath the masonry slabs, still standing in the desert. How close in autumn things are to going to seed, as am I. Some of these poems reference the tarot deck. And I feel that what I was weakest on in terms of the book was putting the book in order. And I know a lot of you are poets, and I know a lot of you don't like doing that either. Or you might like it, but in a hopeful way. How do I put this book in order? Well, Susan Gardner's secret that she's always sharing with me is to take the book, toss it up in the air, and pick it back up. and keep it in the order that it fell in randomly. Now, that sounded horrible to me, but I did it with the last book I did with Red Mountain Press with Beasts, and it was perfect. So I had to do it with this. And I was up in Abiquiu in a little Airbnb, and I threw the book on the floor and I picked it back up and I kept it in the exact order. I had wanted to put the poem, The Fool, as the first poem, right? Because it's about initiation. But it ended up going somewhere else, and I think it was in the right spot. So you'll see more as we go along towards the end that some things also fell into the right order at the end. Here's another monastery, fake monastery poem. In the monastery of a bird bath filled with snow. Each garden pot perfectly rimmed in temporary chilly white elegance. The toddler has scattered 100 tiny worry dolls around the house. She does this every day. They are almost featureless, scraps of thread and cloth size of my fingernail. I keep the world at a distance, the width of my small yard from front door to mailbox, history with its tyrants, its homicidal quarrels and parking lots, its bronze memorials to a version I don't want to read. In the dish drainer, I come upon a child's spoon, clean and ready again, painted with bright hearts. It was your mother's. I kept it, not even knowing who was arriving next. This one is about Truth or Consequences. New Mexico, a hot springs town that, although I love it madly, I can't really recommend it to you because it's so weird. You either already love it madly or you hate it, but I love it. In the monastery of Circumambulation and the Statue of Liberty. Walking by what was once the hospital for crippled children, I lean on my cane, continue past Veterans Memorial Park, where a smallish replica of the Statue of Liberty commemorates 9/11, and a replica of the Vietnam Wall reminds us of, well, things you have not yet had the privilege of forgetting. This is Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, with thorny bushes and so many lovely particular birds. In an ordinary neighborhood, a whitewashed stupa trimmed in gold Buddhas stands positioned with the Rio Grande to the south, a hill shaped like a turtle, sporting a water tower, shaped like a water tower to the north. I circumambulate in the wrong direction at first, my brain addled, not by a vow to save all beings, but by my usual dyslexia. Then switch courses, go round 3 times clockwise in the correct manner, and bow, making a gassho with both hands. My intention? Just to stop quarreling with all the things I do not understand. The book also goes back in time somewhat, of course, inevitable in terms of writing and for a poet, to remember childhood and to remember the past. This poem is for my sisters. It's about a cousin of ours. I changed some details because sort of all the gossip of the garment industry that we grew up in is probably not, should not be engraved in stone or on the internet, because there are still many relatives of these people. So I changed enough details that I hope I obscured it. But the experience of having someone in your family who's not your mother or your father, but who cares about you is very special. So this is for all of those people. And I imagine that we are often those people now ourselves. It's called The Lady of the House. My cousin had a gold watch with diamonds. A tiny lid covered its face, and she kind-heartedly let us play with it. She had feather-covered mules for her small feet and a locket with pictures of her 3 children. Her husband had a mistress, or more than one, in the city, maybe a special girl, and a few for a good time. Among the so-called Russian Jews, not every man was faithful, bent over a Torah. There were gangsters, and I knew them well. This world held lavish bowls of fruit, but kindness was scarcer. I don't know why my mother's cousin cared for me and my sisters, taught us to knit European style, but not to cast off, so that our knitting went on endlessly. I see one of my sisters laughing. We did end up able to knit, but it took some doing. We had to unlearn the bad habit. I think it's really sort of proverbial for writers too, is that you're going to have to end, but you're going to have to figure out how to end. Mercifully, the lyric poem almost ends by itself, right? Lyric poems aren't supposed to do too much. That's the great thing about them. They're not novels. They're just supposed to tell you, my heart is broken, I love you, you don't love me, nature is beautiful, we're all gonna die, the end. And I have to say, I think that theory holds up. Although not in this poem. This poem is another poem of childhood, and this is a poem about survival and the imaginary. It was based on a painting in the Vivo Gallery. They do a nice writing and imagery event every year. And so this is the poem. The poem is about a painting I was paired with some years ago. Swimmer. Barefoot on the hot cement between the turquoise pool and the ice cream stand, my scrawny 7-year-old self with my small belly pooched out across the band of my bathing suit. Suddenly, I'm ringed by the big kids, much bigger than I am, mostly boys, one girl, and they say, let's throw you in the pool and see if you can swim. I can swim, I just don't want to be thrown. So I smile back and mouth off and say, sure, you can easily toss me and I'd never fight you, I'd never win. And for some miraculous reason, this makes them laugh and walk away. No longer threatened, I just jump in myself. Chlorine stinging my eyes, water up my nose, and do the dead man's float beneath the rippled surface. The legs of other swimmers. I see the city I've always known was there, of coral towers and pearl windows, house of peacock shimmer, abalone with roof of oyster shell shingles. It rises from the painted bottom of the pool. I'm careful not to cut my foot on its pagodas as I dive deeper down than surface, holding a penny plucked from the drain. I'd say this next poem for me is the most pandemic-y of the poems, even though it's a grandmother poem and it's about being outdoors, but the quality of sort of solitude and isolation in it reflects the pandemic. Interesting story about this. I think I put the poem on the blog, and then a neighbor of mine, Christy Hanks, who's an amazing visual artist, she incised it in clay. We were doing a series of kind of poetry pop-ups around town. And she put wires around it. She put it on one of the footbridges over the Santa Fe River. And I was so excited, and I put it on the blog, and it got stolen like 12 hours later. So somewhere in Santa Fe, someone has my poem. Well, it's nice they have my poem. In fact, the whole thing was kind of weird and nice, right? You make something and suddenly it has market, it has audience, and it disappeared. But the poem still exists. Pull. I pull the baby in a blue plastic car along the empty dirt road beneath the inverted basin of a sky. Two things are blue, one small, one enormous. The baby has a fate I can't read. She likes to open a board book, then put it in her mouth. The world has gone to hell and left us here, like shells tossed up by a storm to litter the tide's rackline, a pair of unmatched, ridged, bivalvular angel wings. One big, one little. In the monastery of my opinions and some birds. I think everyone here could write a poem with that title. In the monastery of my opinion and some birds. Today, I heard people say, a few stupid things about poetry and even stupider things about war. As I was loading the car to go south, I heard three crows in a leafless tree chatting about how they once were dinosaurs. Coyote follows three people, three sandhill cranes, at a respectful distance. They won't make dinner as they walk along the cornfield, ungainly in their wings, until, perfect, they take to the currents of the air above the bosque with its red salt cedar, its black ducks, its water thrown hallucinogenic blue like silk before the feet of bare desert mountains. The daytime moon is waxing, just not that quickly. My thoughts seem suspended, intimate with stories of the past and unborn stories still to come, while a huge buzzing flock of blackbirds wheels as if to illustrate classic swarm theory until they turn against the light, vanish. You can't really have like a favorite poem because really your favorite poem is the one you just wrote. But sometimes there's poems that seem meaningful long after they were written. And for me, this is one of them. It's called Ancestors, and I think I will never truly understand the past of my family, nor be uninterested in writing about it. It's pure recreation, since I was not in the pale of the Ukraine. Ancestors. Zodiac swam in its round. Above the wooden ark, veiled women hid behind a mechitza of water and blood. If I was a child, I ran among their legs. If I was a child, I ran. In the Red Cafe in Kiev, at the teetering round table, in steam and smoke like a railway station, tea served in endless glasses, they are shouting again, those philosophers too broke to pay. But suddenly I can't hear them. Sound fades their ghosts, and what am I? In all of history, who can care about one girl, tired, besmirched, sitting by the coals of a dying fire? Who can care about birch trees? There are so many. Who can care about rape, about how my eyes turn a betraying green, or how my fingers curl helplessly as DNA deforms my hand? The double helix of Vikings, Cossacks, the Rus come down out of the cold shamanic north for bad, for worse. Ancestors come if I call, smelling like a snuffed candle, and come if I don't call, smelling of hospital corridors and panic. For the angels are too busy encouraging each blade of grass to grow, reciting the alphabet, but only from Aleph to Aleph. They have not yet reached the first letter of my name. Before this, a wall. Before that, destruction. Before that, an ark on the deep, a raven, a dove, an opinion about what survives. Dawn struck. Dawn struck the mountain. I needed to awaken back into my old crippled self. Don't tell me what word to use. After all, who really knows a tree's name except the tree? I opened the door of the one-room house, stuffy with the night of dreams, stacked up like airplanes in fog over a great city. The toddler pulls my turquoise skirt to lead me. She wants to go in. She wants to go out. The metal Buddha cast from the emptiness of mold. When I was young, I thought I'd leave this world of forms. Now I see a bird on a waving branch through a shadow on the whitewashed wall. And I'm just going to read a few more poems coming to the end. The end that was decided by throwing everything up in the air and letting it land. And there are always hot springs in my poems because I'm always going to hot springs and then I'm feeling relaxed and then I'm writing a poem. This is also about the passage of time, particularly in New Mexico, where we constantly are talking about where things used to be and how we miss the old Albertsons that used to be a bowling alley. Why this nostalgia creates a map, a nostalgia that I picked up the first 3 weeks I was here. I started missing things I'd never even seen. And now that I've been here for so decades, I still miss those things. And this is about Ojo Caliente. I was teaching a class at that time for Dr. Julia Deisler at SFCC, and a book that she and I both love was on the syllabus, and I lost the book in the course of the poem. Ojo Caliente. Once, between here and there, I left a copy of Le Guin's The Left-Handed Darkness in an unmade bed on an old hotel room at a hot spring, south of Tres Piedras and north of Hernandez. It wasn't so long ago that you had to bear right at the round abandoned adobe and take the one-lane bridge through the Pueblo. But it was longer ago that you could soak in the pools and a private bathtub and get wrapped in towel and blankets for under $7. The first time I was here was in the 1970s on the women's side, when I was in love with someone who would never love me back. And yes, I bought another copy of the book and finished it. Two more poems. This poem is pretty central to the pandemic, and I think also to the idea of start again. You know, I love the cover of the book because it's got these two circles. This is Susan Gardner's work, and right behind the first gear, you probably can't see it here, is a smaller gear. And that's very relational to me. And also that sense that sometimes we're doing something and sometimes the cosmos is doing something to us. Sort of, you can't really drive with these wheels. And they represent for me that intersection between intention and loss of control. That really is what drives a poem. Again, you can get this book through small press distribution. You can go to the bookstore and have them order it for you. And this poem is called Mr. Death. So of course it's about COVID, but it's also about my ongoing relationship to Mr. Death. And the start of it is something that my husband Rich said to me at breakfast. Mr. Death, you say, I know about your other boyfriend, Death. Walking the arroyo, descansos in the culvert, altars to the abruptly departed, gone water. Out in the desert, a windmill stock pond full of golden koi. Was I like that when I was young, tended or neglected? On this lined page, a fractured narrative, I must have written, but have forgotten. In a notebook bound in a reproduction of Courbet's The Calm Sea. That's Mr. Death to you. And the last poem actually should have been the last poem in the book. I mean, it is like so obviously the last poem. It was written as part of a project for Center for Contemporary Art a few years ago, where they had poets writing, and then they would show some of the lines of poetry in between films or when the movie was about to start. And we also read. So there's definitely reference to film here and to the experience of this shift of consciousness and perception. And it also is about spring coming. So I think that's perfect for us right now. So I'll read this and then, we'll take a few questions. Spring is coming. I know that spring is coming. Desire in our always broken hearts, chipped and mended so many times, like Japanese teacups, no longer the original color, but gold in the cracks, until the breaks predominate and the whole cup is precious metal. Stepping out from the black and white movie to find the world in color, more vivid than before, or turning the pages of the book, a sudden flush of vastness. These moments cannot be possessed, traded for love, or a black slouch hat, but fall through the soft air as if slipping from bare branches, like meteors, wishes, or blossoms. So thank you all for listening and for letting me share. Those of you who have published books, you know the book it's strange. It's alive in one sense when you get the first copies, but it's not really alive. It has to come to life by having readers. So if people want to either ask, but maybe best of all put in the chat.
Yes, thank you, Miriam. Just so beautiful. And as listeners, we may bring it to life, but just hearing your voice, read your work is such a special experience. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
For those of you who have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. If the chat ends up being really slow, there's a lot of people here, so unmiking ourselves might be a little confusing. But if things are very slow, we can have people unmic themselves and ask questions as well. So.
This is your chance.
Any questions?
Otherwise, I'll say a few things and that'll be that.
Susan, do you have a question? Oh, Susanna.
So, Miriam, I've had the pleasure since we've been locked down of absorbing an enormous amount of haiku, right? You and I'm her tech support for multiple haiku readings. And that first felt jarring to me. So short, like, where's the rest of it, you know? And tonight I'm having the reverse experience. How do you, when you're writing and you're thinking, is it obvious to you what's going to be longer? Do you, I know haiku is rigid in the syllables and all that, but it's also 3 lines. Like, how do you, is it a surprise to you how you write and how it turns out, or are you very like strict on the front end?
It's a really great question, and you've certainly become a haiku tech expert. Basically, I do have an intention when I'm working. And if I'm writing haiku, I'm just writing haiku. Lyric poem, I hear it in my head. It's like a small piece of music. It really is like a song. So it will end. But sometimes things I know are going to be bigger. There's a sequence in here called Tiamat in Nets, which I didn't read from because I feel it's hard to read from it. It's about the Sumerian goddess Tiamat, who's the goddess of flood. And there's a lot of, the poems are partially about birth and partially about other things, but it ends with a very, very short poem, almost like a haiku. And I'll read that now. So there's a lot of material behind it. And this is when I said to my daughter, Isabel, something about Tiamat, the Sumerian goddess, who Judy Chicago uses a lot. She's a figure caught in the net. And I like this little short poem. I tell you, Tiamat got caught in the net. And you say, I know who Tiamat is. And Tiamat, of course, is obscure. And sometimes you love people because you know the same obscure things as they do. And also, since it represents kind of maternal destruction and rejuvenation, of course, we know what that is, you know, whether we have a label for it or not. I think I saw a poem, a question from.
Yes, there's one about throwing your poems up to decide the order. Does this extend to writing of poems, or will it, do you think?
I just have to say, I'm happy that Rene Gregorio is here, an incredible poet from the North. I I think there's just a lot of tension for anybody writing poetry between the random and the controlled. And you can tell when you look at your own poem, wow, this is really random. And I don't mean that as a compliment. And then again, you can look at your poem and say, this was really controlled. And I don't mean that as a compliment, right? It's two sets of muscles. If they can work in tandem, then, you're having a good day. I tend to throw out, Renee, what I cannot easily revise. So I'm trying to keep the random in, or the rough edge in. I'm not one to super polish. If I can't get the whole skeleton, the outline of it, I will toss it. Don't get upset. It's not really tossed. It's buried somewhere, but I hate it. So that's the end of it. I think that when I'm revising, or I'm trying to prune to the essential music or voice that's in the poem, and that's going to have some random qualities. But, again, it kind of depends, who's the inner poet of the day, like the mad, drunken beat poet or the uptight, academically trained poet, and can they get on with each other at all? So I would say yes, but it's not a harmonious decision always. What else have you got for me, Valerie?
Let's see, we have another question about one of the poems you read. When you spoke of the ruined city, I thought of, why does the city sit solitary when she was once filled with people?
Hi, Erin. That ruined city, I feel I ought to credit it, is from a film about Macedonia, about wild beekeepers. And I think it's called Honey, and it's a remarkable, haunting movie about an old lady and an even older lady, her mother, living someplace that was abandoned, and they've got wild bees. But it's a completely Grecian classical image. It's like all ruins share that in common. Some are abandoned from drought, some are conquered and destroyed, and some people just move to the city because there's more work. But a city without people, I have to say, sad as it is, historically, is one of my favorite things to see. I love it. I love it. But, the Romantic poets of England just went traipsing around looking for ruins. They didn't care that those ruins came from, Cromwell bashing things up, or Henry VIII. They just liked that they were ruined. And I think it's a great way to write. So, anything else?
That's all we have as far as questions go. There are lots of people saying they're going to buy your book, and congratulations and comments.
Okay, great. I'll take a look. So basically, most, obviously, if you're here, you're pretty much on my mailing list or on Facebook. Susan Gardner and I are reading March 6th at in a bookstore in Sarasota, which you can go to because it's on Zoom. I'll be posting that information. If you need me, you can find me on my blog. My email's on the blog. And please write some poems, okay? Just write some poems. That would make me very happy. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Are we finished, or could I ask a question?
On Thorndike, you can always ask a question.
I finally figured out how to unmute myself here. I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but I'm no poetry. I so rarely listen to poems or read them. And what I kept seeing in your poems is this obsession or a fascination with everything starting and ending. And I see that you've got a whole book, unlike a novel, which kind of flows along. Each one is going to start and end, and I kept seeing that come in over and over. With the ancestors, I forget what I wrote down here. The ancestors, the ancestors smelling like a snuffed candle. Things are just always coming in from the past. And I don't know what I'm saying, except that it's kind of opened up what a whole poetry collection is to me.
Thank you. That's really great. I mean, many years ago when I was quite young and at the MacDowell Colony, a composer said to me, a piece of music is sad when it ends, whether it ends, on a major or a minor note, because after it is silence.
Yeah.
And there's an assertion involved in writing a poem or a piece of music or painting or drawing or anything, or dancing, there's an assertion because you have blank space, you have emptiness, and you're asserting the human voice into that void, and it's going to end. You know, even a John Cage piece that goes on for 24 hours, it's going to end. And therefore, it's almost like, in a way, it's rushing towards its end while trying to linger, right? While trying, and, you know, I don't expect anybody to read the book all the way through from start to finish in that order. I think a book of poetry gets a little dog-eared, people pick it up, they read something, they put it down. So the order, in a way, exists for the a feeling of harmony about creating the book. But the poems also exist individually, and they are starting and ending. And yeah, it's you're right.
And the older we get, the more we realize there's another big ending coming. You know, endings. Every time something is ending in a small way, I begin to see it in a larger way.
Absolutely. I think that awareness is in lyric poetry, even when people are 19.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that poetry does, essentially.
I'd like to tell you two things.
Certainly.
First of all, to answer Renee, and we've talked about this many, many times, I do not give the same advice to everybody. Believe me, very few people can actually follow my advice to Miriam. First of all, they don't dare, and Miriam's willing to try and dare almost anything. The first time she tried this was up at 10,000 waves in a bathrobe. And we still do a little bit of fussing around afterwards for a few months, but it really depends on the poet and maybe their relationship with whoever they're working with, and also your capacity for surprise. Miriam's capacity for surprise is pretty much endless. We've done 5 books together now, but a lot of people don't have that capacity, and this is not the right thing for them to do. And the other thing is, I'm happy to say, don't panic. I'm happy to say that the book is sold out.
Wow.
But we will reprint it, but you'll have to be a little patient. I just found out this afternoon that there's none at the distributor. So we have to start with the printer. Everything takes a little longer. You all know this. I'm telling you what you already know. But everything does really, truly take a little longer. And so if you order it from SPD, which would be the best thing, or from our website, redmountainpress.us, that's the best. It would probably take maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks for it to arrive at the distributor for them to fill your order.
You know, Susan, we'll talk. I have some books.
Oh, okay. Well, we can hurry up the process then a little bit. So,
I have some books, but we'll talk tomorrow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But anyway, I would say that we had a lot of fun. And when I first proposed this idea to Miriam, she said, "You're crazy. I can't do that." But then she was willing.
It's gospel truth to me.
It is to me too. I do my own books that way because I like to find out what's in them, and I never know. Only one book I didn't do that way. But do keep in mind, March 6th, Miriam and I will read with another person who's 83 years old, and this is his first book after being a poet for 50 years. And I think it'll be a really nice reading. So we'll all send out that as well. You want to hear Miriam again. She'll probably read different poems the next time.
So my friends, I think we'll say, hang around and say hello to each other or to me. But we'll say officially over, and you know what? Valerie and I were noticing it could snow, there could be a tornado. We didn't have to cancel the Zoom reading. That was pretty great. All right, thank you all.
Oh, thank you. Indeed.
Thank you. What a pleasure to see you.